Chapter 24 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 24. Playing Heavy Father to Rachel. Never had the enchantress Isis looked so enchanting to my eyes as she looked that night. I felt, as the set trooped on board, like an anxious hen mother, who, contrary to her fears, has safely returned a brood of ducklings to the home chicken coop after a swim out to sea. I valued each duckling, even the last downy, far more than I had dreamed it would be possible. But there was one duckling valued so much more than all the rest, how much more I had realized only when, cackling on the bank, I saw it on the wave, that knowing that it was safe made me hysterical with joy. I could have kissed its napkin when it slid it off its lap and I picked it up. The napkin, not the duck, at dinner. The drawback was that I had not saved it, as Anthony had saved Monny. It had no reason to be grateful to me, or care more than it had always cared for a friend. And still another drawback presented itself when the confusion of dressing in haste and dining, as the enchantress Isis steamed out of Luxor, gave me time to think. The duckling was not my duckling, and considered that it had calmly laid plans for me to capture an heiress, considering also that it had not yet abandoned these plans, I saw little reason to hope that, now I had come to just a few, of my senses, it would ever take the idea seriously of becoming mine. To abandon, once and forever, the duckling simile, the first thing I did on board the boat, after recovering from the excitement of seeing Mabel off by train with the Bronsons, was to wonder how I could make up for all this hideous waste of time when I might have been making love to Biddy. But there was no chance to say anything personal to her that night. I had to hear, and wanted to hear, the story of all that had happened from the moment she and Monny entered Rashid Bey's gate, to the moment they came out. Then there was Antoun's story to follow, and after that we had to compare notes, how everybody had felt, what everybody had thought, what everybody had done. This subject was inexhaustible, and kept cropping up in the midst of others, but that of Mabella Hânem, her escape from bondage and from conversion to Islam, and what revenge Rashid was likely to take, was almost as engrossing. When at last, late that evening, I managed to get Biddy alone for a moment, she could no more be induced to talk of herself than if she had been a ghost without visible existence, a mere voice, to speak of others, Monny by preference. What a heroine Monny had been from first to last! And what did I think now about the foolishness of that theory, the theory that Bedr was a spy, and had led his employers to believe that Mrs. Jones was travelling with her stepdaughter, concealed under an impeccably important nom de guerre? What I thought was, that we must get a hold of Miss Rachel Guest, and question her as to her whole acquaintance with the Armenian, learning how, by all that was incredible, the double mystery of mixed names had originated. Monny knows only that Rachel was supposed to be the heiress, testing her personal attractions by pretending to be the poor school teacher, said Brigit. The child's been wildly enjoying the situation, for she was tired of young men. Rachel wasn't, and Rachel's been profiting by it, far more wickedly. As for Esmé, I'm sure no thought of her name coming into this business ever entered Monny's head. We must try to find out what Bedr said to Rachel at the beginning, as you advised, Duffer, and all about it. After what I told you that I heard from Esmé about an exciting love romance, any mistake of this sort might be particularly dangerous. The organization might think it had more right than ever to be bitter against us. And now, I don't mind your confiding in your friend Captain Fenton. I think I'd like him to know my story. What Biddy had told me about Esmé was, that the girl had confessed, in a letter, having been made love to, during a summer holiday in the mountains with friends, by the son of a man her father had deeply injured. The accidental meeting had been a real romance. The girl and the young man thought that no one save themselves shared their secret. But who could tell, when fate itself stood between them with a drawn sword? The love of Romeo for Juliet was a safe and simple affair compared with the merest flirtation between the daughter of Richard O'Brien and the son of John Halloran, whom O'Brien's testimony had sent to prison for life. Sometimes I thought, as the days went on, that Biddy guessed, not my change of heart but my new understanding of it, and that she wanted quietly and gently to show me, according to Bill Bailey's pet expression, there was nothing doing. Her expressed wish that Fenton should hear her story looked to my suddenly suspicious mind as if his strong personality and his extremely picturesque position had made an appeal to the romance in her, as it had in the case of Mrs. East and perhaps Monty Gilder. Always interested in Mrs. Jones from first sight, when he had laughingly said that the little sprite of a woman would be almost too alluring if surrounded by an air of mystery and intrigue, Anthony was now frankly preoccupied with her affairs. He was not even annoyed that, unaided by me, her quick mind had grasped the secret of his identity. It was like her to spring on to it by instinct, he said, smiling that thoughtful smile of his, which was more than ever effective in his Arab get-up. And like her not to give anybody else a hint, except you, of course, though she must have been tempted sometimes. I suppose," and he looked up quickly, "she hasn't given anyone else a hint? I'd swear she hasn't. Miss Gilder, you're sure she hasn't the slightest suspicion?" "As sure as a man can be of anything about a woman. You aren't trying to evade the question, Duffer?" "On my word, I'm not. I feel morally certain Miss Gilder labours under the impression that you're as brown as you're painted. That somehow or other you can't be Muslim because she's seen you without a turban, and you've got the hair of a Christian. Maybe she thinks you're a Copt. I heard her learnedly arguing the other day that the Copts are the only real Egyptians. She has the air of studying you sometimes, but with all her study she sees you only as an Egyptian of high birth and attainments, with a few drops of European blood in your veins, perhaps just enough to make things aggravating, and a vague right to a princely position if you choose to overlook something or other and claim it. There you have her conception of you in a nutshell." There would still have been room in that nutshell for Cleopatra's ideas concerning her niece's feelings. But if she were right, it was Anthony's business to discover those feelings for himself, provided that he cared to do so. And of this I was not sure. There was the doubt that it might be Biddy, even though he appeared to attach some unexplained importance to Miss Gilder's continued ignorance about himself. The day after leaving Luxor there was no time for the heart-to-heart talk I planned for Rachel Guest. Each hour, each minute almost, was taken up with my duties as conductor, which I was obliged to regard seriously, whether I liked them or not. If I did not, the set growled, snapped, or clamoured, which gave me even more trouble than doing my duty. For some reason best known to herself, but suspected by me, Mrs. East kept to her suite, nursing a grievance and the Siberian lapdog from a suet. This saved me a certain amount of brain strain, for among other places of interest we had to pass near was ancient Hermonthis, where in her Cleopatra incarnation she had built a temple with a portrait of herself adoring the patron bull of the city. If she had known how easy it would be to visit the ruins, she would have been capable of desiring the boat to stop, or telegraphing complaints to Sir Marcus if it hadn't. The two excitements of the day were passing through a huge loch, with sides like those of a canyon, and scarlet doors such as might adorn the house of an ogre, in which we nearly stuck, and were saved by Antoun seizing the pole from the inferior hands of a Nubian boatman; also a visit to Esneh, a very Coptic town, starred with convents built by the ever-present St. Helena, sacred once to the Latos fish, now sacred to gorgeous baskets of every size and colour, also somewhat over-beaded and over-scarabed. A ruined quay jutted into the wine-brown water, where Roman inscriptions could have spied out, if any one had had eyes to spare from the basket sellers, the sellers of grapefruit, and the other shouting merchants who flocked to head us off on our way to the temple, despite a flurry of rain that freckled the deep sand of the landing hill. But nobody did have eyes for anything Roman, now that Cleopatra sulked in her throne-room, and our only archaeologist was as absent-minded as if he had been his own astral body. He had seen the wisdom of sticking to the trip and not turning back by train with the Bronsons and somebody else, as he might have yearned to do, if Monny were right, but history had suddenly become as dry husks to Sheridan. His soul was no longer with us, journeying up the Nile, and I suspected his body of packing to join it, as soon as things had been arranged to un-Hanem Mabel, and send her, freed from a marriage which was not marriage, freed from this fear or forcible conversion, home to the United States. It was just on the cards, Anthony and I thought, that there might be another demonstration at Esneh. It was just on the cards, Anthony and I thought, that there might be another demonstration at Esneh, that unruly town where Muhammad Ali banished the superfluous dancing girls of Cairo in the 1840s. If Rechid Bey had not discovered the truth about that hurried departure from Luxor for